What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 15 waiver wire targets heading into week 6 of the NFL season. The waiver wire been a little bit thin this season. Last week was actually kind of interesting, but more specifically midweek with like the Trey Benson, Chuba Hubbard injuries. This week still feels a little bit thin, but some interesting options at tight end. A big-time running back went down, so that could be interesting. If you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe. I'll also throw it out there. These are players that are rostered in 40% or fewer leagues on ESPN. But let's talk about the Chargers running backs. That's where we're going to start it off here. Unfortunately, the Chargers, another big injury on offense. They've lost both of their stud tackles. Now, Marion Hampton suffers an ankle injury. He was seen in a walking boot after the game. So I think you could be in the mix to pick up either Hassan Haskins or Kimani Vidal. Both of these guys are going to be available in pretty much every single league. Haskins rostered in 0.3% of leagues. Kimani Vidal rostered in 0% of leagues. Now, I would slightly prefer Hassan Haskins as the pickup. After the Najee Harris injury, Haskins was operating as the running back too. He was the primary backup to Marion Hampton. Now, it's not like he was getting great usage or anything, right? Like he was just filtering in when Hampton needed a rest. Hampton was the workhorse in that offense, but he was on the roster to start off the season. He was the running back too. I would lean towards him being the better option, but I'm still expecting a very solid split with the next guy, Kimani Vidal. We saw both of these guys play 14 snaps in week 5. Kimani Vidal was someone who actually had a lot of hype heading into last year, where you're looking at this wide open running back room. J.K. Dobbins coming off, I think it was the torn Achilles. Gus Edwards just being nothing special. It was like you've got this day 3 rookie, Kimani Vidal. Could he have some juice, come in, make an impact? The answer was firmly no. And the reason I like him a little bit less than Haskins is that he didn't actually make the opening day roster. He was cut. He was re-signed on the practice squad. So just based on how the Chargers treated these two guys, like Hassan Haskins actually being on the team, you'd expect Hassan Haskins to be the better option. But like I said, I think both are going to be involved. I don't think this is going to be a workhorse type situation like we saw with Hampton. It's very possible this is a gross split and they just end up riding the hot hand. Now, the next player I want to talk about here actually has not played yet this week. That is Brashard Smith, who's rostered in 4.7% of leagues. I think especially if you're in a league where you can actually cut someone who's already played, pick up someone who, has not played yet. I think Brashard Smith is a really solid pickup. We've seen him kind of, slowly get an increase in his usage. He saw a nice bump in week 4. There's been reports that he's going to be much more involved in week 5. And I would not be shocked if he went out there and really looked like a significant part of this offense, potentially rivaling Pacheco and or Kareem Hunt in opportunities. It just comes down to the fact that this run game has not been good. Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt are just not difference makers at the running back position. And so maybe Brashard Smith coming in here as a day 3 rookie has some juice. His best skill set is definitely his ability as a pass catcher. He was a wide receiver in college who transitioned to running back, I think, for his last couple of seasons. So he is great in the receiving game. We know the Chiefs, especially without Rashee Rice still, need guys who can make plays in the passing game. So I think he's an interesting pickup. Obviously, you want to be targeting pieces of this Chiefs offense and could definitely see a nice bump in usage here on Monday Night Football. Then I'm going to go with someone who played on Thursday night, and that is Kendrick Bourne, rostered in 6.5% of leagues. Now, I know some people are going to be all in on Kendrick Bourne. He had a monster game, 11 targets, 10 receptions for 142 yards. I think the Kendrick Bourne overall time frame here for being fantasy relevant is pretty short. I think if Pearsall and or Jennings are back in week 6, I think for fantasy, Kendrick Bourne is kind of cooked. So I'm not spending a high waiver claim on him. I'm not spending a ton of fab on him. But if you did need a potential starting option in week 6 and the injuries continue with Pearsall, Jennings, George Kittle unlikely to play in week 6, then I do think Kendrick Bourne is definitely someone you could slide into your lineup. But if you think this is a Kendrick Bourne breakout, he's going to be fantasy relevant long term, I would just kind of fade that. So if you're banking on injuries for week 6 and want him in your lineup, I understand the pickup. If not someone who I'm giving up a ton to bring in. Then some running backs here. Going to start off with Kendre Miller, who is rostered in 21% of leagues. And I think I talked about him last week. It kind of made some improvements in this backfield. He goes out in week 5, gets more carries than Alvin Kamara. He gets 10 to Kamara's 8. Alvin Kamara played a season-low 56% of the snaps, and then Kendre Miller has come in and also just taken over these short yardage situations. Now, I will say I do think game script had a lot to do with this kind of split where typically, and I think still moving forward, the Saints are going to be trailing in a lot of games. You want someone like Kamara with his pass-catching skill set. If you are ahead, you have more of like that early down grinder in Kendre Miller. But I do think it's notable that he is kind of gaining on Kamara in this backfield. Who knows what happens with Kamara rest of season? Obviously, he's an older running back. Injury risk is probably a little bit higher, but the fact that Kendre Miller is kind of emerging as the clear-cut running back too, definitely someone who should be on a lot of rosters moving forward. Then someone who really has no week-to-week value, but just needs to be rostered in pretty much every single league. It is Brian Robinson Jr., and this is kind of to be expected with these handcuff running backs, but as the season goes along, certain players kind of pop. Guys want players who are actually giving you immediate production. The handcuffs typically start to get cut. So B-Rob is rostered in 35.1% of leagues. And it's just as simple as like the Christian McCaffrey handcuff needs to be rostered. I know there are a lot of people out there that were completely fading Christian McCaffrey because of his injury history. They were positive he was going to get hurt. They were positive he wouldn't be able to stay healthy. And I'm not even going to say that was like, a crazy take to have. Obviously, CMC has been amazing, but we're only 5 weeks into the season here. When you have the clear backup to a running back with an extensive injury history who's averaging 26 touches per game, like that player needs to be rostered. Like I said, CMC has been amazing, but he has had injury concerns. His workload, his usage has been insane to start off the season. If CMC were to go down, B-Rob is going to become the priority pickup. And when we're just looking at like the odds of any stud running back going down, it seems like CMCs are kind of significantly higher than a lot of these other top running backs just based on the history. And then also just the amount of wear and tear he's putting on his body in this specific season. So B-Rob should be rostered in pretty much every single league. And then I talked about Brashard Smith playing tonight. Bhayshul Tuten is also playing tonight, rostered in 36.2% of leagues. I just think he's a really fun player, someone who I really liked as a sleeper this season. I feel like worst case scenario, he's just a really valuable handcuff on an offense with a really effective run game. Like Travis Etienne has been awesome. Bhayshul Tuten has shown some flashes in, the limited sample sizes he is getting week to week. So someone who I do think should be picked up, especially if you're in a format where you can drop some random bench player who has already played this week. Then we're going to get into some of the tight ends here, guys that could potentially slot into your lineup in week 6. I'll start off with Mason Taylor, who is rostered in 8.1% of leagues. Week 5, great usage, 83% raw participation, 11 targets that led the team even over Garrett Wilson, 9 receptions for 67 yards. That was after a very solid week 4 where he was targeted 7 times, caught 5 of them for 65 yards. Also, just like shout out to the Jets because they will just be putting on these complete offensive stinkers, the big time weapons, I guess specifically Garrett Wilson, not producing for fantasy. And then they just turn into like these garbage time demons where then they'll just like, run up the score a little bit, or I guess, keep the score somewhat respectable. And then it leads to actually decent fantasy production for a lot of these dudes like Garrett Wilson, late game touchdown in both week 4 and week 5. Justin Fields kind of padding those stats a little bit. It is definitely a positive that even on a bad offense, like if they are trailing by a decent amount and they can just kind of, pad some of those stats late in the game, it does kind of help both the floor and ceiling of these Jets weapons. But like I always talk about, young players, Mason Taylor's a rookie. If they start to pop, start to show that they have something, you want to buy in before it's too late. Then we have Theo Johnson here, rostered in 5.5% of leagues. Really nice week 5, 76% raw participation, which is solid. 7 targets, 6 receptions for 33 yards. And then the big fantasy production, the 2 touchdowns there. This is just a wide open group of targets. You're competing with like Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Cam Scatterbo's been a big factor out of the backfield. I don't think this offense is going to be all that great. I don't think the passing attack is going to be all that great, but there's like a real opportunity here for Theo Johnson to command a decent amount of targets and be, one of, if not potentially the top weapon in this offense. And then the last tight end I want to talk about, who I think is pretty playable in week 6, is Jake Tonges on the 49ers, rostered in 5.3% of leagues. And with George Kittle out, the usage has just been really solid. Week 5, 80% route participation, 10 targets, 7 receptions for 41 yards and a touchdown. That's 14 plus points in back-to-back games. He scored a touchdown in 3 of the 5 games this season. And it looks like George Kittle is very likely to be out heading into week 6. So if you need a desperate play at tight end, Tonges could be your guy here. Now, I want to talk about one specific team that's coming off of bye week and their rookies. I did this in the last week's video. I want to talk about the Bears because you have Luther Burden, Kyle Monangai, and Colston Loveland. I think all 3 of these dudes are worth a pickup, where their roster percentages definitely dropped after going on bye. None of these guys have really stood out so far this season, but we've seen year after year, typically after the bye week, that's where these rookies can take a big leap. And I think there's legit opportunity for all 3 of these dudes to see a major bump in their usage. So for Luther Burden, can he come out in week 6 and overtake Olamide Zaccheaus as the wide receiver 3? Luther Burden showed some flashes. They've used him creatively. Olamide Zaccheaus has actually been kind of fine, but if we're talking about upside, long-term, I mean, Luther Burden should be the guy who's in that spot. So it's possible he goes out there week 6, is just the wide receiver 3, and then can really start building from there. Then we have Kyle Monangai. Can he overtake or at least push a really strong split with DeAndre Swift? DeAndre Swift's been terrible. Bears go into the bye week, do some self-scouting. I don't think it's crazy that they, come out of that thinking Kyle Monangai needs to touch the ball more, DeAndre Swift needs to touch the ball less. And then the last guy here, Colston Loveland. I'm just a big believer in him as a talent. The usage had been underwhelming early on in the season. Then he gets kind of banged up in a game that I think could have been his breakout. But Cole Kmet is just nothing special. He's coming off a really rough week 4. If Colston Loveland's healthy, I'd actually be a little bit surprised for Loveland if he did not come out and operate as the tight end 1 post-bye. So all 3 of those Bears rookies, I think, are worth pickups. I think we have 3 more players here. I'll start off with Jalen Coker, who's rostered in 8.6% of leagues. It looks like he's going to have his practice window open this week. He's been on IR to start off the season. The Panthers are just still looking for a reliable number 2 target. Coker kind of popped as a fun, undrafted rookie in 2024. They felt confident enough in his ability to play out of the slot as a starter that they willingly traded away Adam Thielen. So I think he could have a nice year too, just kind of a fun dart throw, especially if you can still slot him in on IR, to not burn a roster spot. And then I have a couple of Browns rookies. The first one will be Harold Fannin Jr. I think I've talked about him every single week, rostered in 23.9% of leagues. And the issue here for Harold Fannin is that his usage has just been too unreliable week to week, where you look at week 1, it's solid, week 2, it's solid, week 3, he takes a hit. Then he goes out week 4 and has, career season bests. He actually plays more snaps, runs an extra route over David Njoku, and you're thinking, wow, is this a flip? Is Harold Fannin just going to be the better option moving forward? And then the usage just completely falls off. Now, he does get into the end zone. If you played him, he was a fine option, especially you're probably desperate at tight end. But in terms of being a weekly option, he's not there yet, but still a young, talented rookie, especially in deeper leagues, someone who I still think is worth rostering. And then the last guy here, also definitely for deeper leagues, Isaiah Bond, rostered in 4.6% of leagues. With Cedric Tillman out, he has an 86% route participation, clear top 2 wide receiver. He led all of their wideouts with 6 targets, only turned it into 2 receptions for 29 yards. But the Browns are rolling out their rookies. It's not insignificant that, undrafted rookie Isaiah Bond is already getting top 2 wide receiver usage. So we'll see if he can kind of, make an impact on that with Tillman still out. In normal sized leagues, I'm not super excited, but in deeper leagues, deep benches, ton of teams, I do think he could be worth a pickup. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 15 waiver wire ads. Definitely a lot of depth this week, maybe not super top heavy, but I still think there are some potential gems out there. So thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.